Ladies and gentlemen, we are in for a real treat tonight on Sportswire Radio. And it's not too often that we get to speak with a Hall of Famer, one of the true GOATs, arguably the greatest wrestler in backyard wrestling history, but I would dare say that's right, even in wrestling history, because our guest has been a world champion 11 times and maybe even counting. He has also been a Hall of Famer in two companies. You might even see two of them right there. And right now, he might be playing his most important role yet because EBW is back. And not only have they come back, I would argue to say that they're the strongest they have ever been. We'll talk about all of that. And he even does some things on the side, like some streaming, some writing. He is the true definition of a jack of all trades. He needs no further introduction, but because it's his show tonight and he is everything that is the true definition of EBW, he has to get a better introduction than Fletch, Justin Parsley, Trinity, and everybody else that's been on here from XCW. So with that, without further ado here, on the Sports Boy, number one global sports show, the franchise player, the leader of EBW, the GOAT, Chris Jones. How you doing?
Wow, what an introduction. I'm doing good. How are you?
Asked my voice in like 2 hours, and I've been sick for the last 5 days. But I'm like, you know what? It's Chris Jones. I'm like, it doesn't matter if I'm on death's door. We're doing this on Sportswire. But no, I'm obviously doing well. Checks in the mail. But we had to top the intros that Parsley got, ACT got, Fletch got, Trinity got, Law got, because you are here with us. We'll certainly get into the current, undoubtedly in the future, of EBW, XCW in a second. But obviously, for those that are listening and watching here on Sportswire Radio, Chris Jones, you are arguably the greatest backyard wrestler of all time. I mean, what has it been to be able to start from your career in 1996 to where you are now? What has that meant?
It's been an incredible ride, to be honest. We've definitely had a lot of highs, but there have been a lot of lows throughout the years. You know, starting in 1996, obviously on the ground. In '96, I was only 7 years old. I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
I didn't think you were like 30 or something like that, like other people. I didn't think you were like old in '96. So
only 34 now, and
you look good, by the way. You look good.
Thanks. And '96, you know, we started on the ground. Me and a couple buddies. It wasn't no organized wrestling, but
Sure.
you know, ultimately, as you do know, transitioned into HCW, a company ran by Hazard,
Yes.
XCW Hall of Famer, and Justin Parsley, who is not in the XCW Hall of Fame, which I do feel is still a tragedy to this day.
Well, I mean, he might be working on it because he actually holds gold now in XCW. I'm sure.
That he does.
I'll definitely get into that. But, you know, you said something interesting. And obviously, I think your journey's a little slightly different than Parsley or even certainly Mr. Josh Fletcher that we'll get into, I'm sure, as well. But, you know, in 96, right, you're starting out on the ground. Now, I can appreciate this because I'm about the same age as you. You might be just a tad older than me. But in 1996, to where we are now, there was no really, you were going out there and wrestling your friends after probably watching Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, whatever it was, and nobody knew that what we would have right now. And I mean, kind of take us back in those days, and where nobody was documenting anything. And I mean, just talk about those experiences, those first early memories.
Well, even it's kind of crazy because it's not really I want to say it's not even really ground. I lived in an apartment complex and it was like
Okay.
this
I
little
can
area.
appreciate that. I grew up in Brooklyn, so I could definitely appreciate the apartment complex.
This little area between like our patio door and like the sidewalk. So instead of being like, a normal grassy area, a little softer, more dirt, stuff like that, this ground's kind of really, really hard. And we would just go
I
out.
could tell you I've been on a lot of grounds that have been hard in Brooklyn. I can tell you that much.
We would just go out there and, do moves and stuff to each other. There was obviously people that lived above me and they'd be like, "Oh, you guys down here wrestling?" And we're like, "Yeah." And they'd throw down like cookie sheets, diaper boxes, just pretty much whatever trash they had around their house, their apartment, they'd throw it down the floor, and we just beat the crap out of each other. One of those guys that's not really well known throughout XCW is a big NAW wrestler, company ran by Hazard. One of those guys was Tsunami.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Someone that might not be well known towards XCW. And Tsunami and his brother JJ were excellent wrestlers for their age because they were like Tsunami a little younger than me, probably a year or two, and then JJ's like, you gotta think I'm 7, so that makes Tsunami like 6. That means JJ's like 5 or 4. We're just all just kicking the crap out of each other. It was
what was that
it was
like,
a great
though?
time.
I mean, you're 7 and 6 wrestling on the ground. I mean, Jacoby's got it made compared to you. I mean, I'm not going to go there just yet, but I mean, you're wrestling at 7 and you're wrestling 6-year-olds. I mean, like, what's the comprehension on that?
There is no comprehension. It's just like, Stone Cold went out and, he stunned like 30 people. How about, I go out there and I stun people or anything like that. And that was when I really developed the point, like when I grew up, like, this is me, Chris Jones, pro wrestler. I'll be better than everybody. Ultimately, I'm not a pro wrestler, so the dream didn't pan out, but that was when the dream
you had some attempt. There was an attempt. I certainly know that we'll get into that, but you've obviously had quite a career, and we're here on Sportswire talking about, and I'll put up some links where people can kind of follow you. But then, okay, talk me then as we evolve a few years later, where you start to really get a little bit more organized, kind of around the end of the 1990s, around 1998 or 99, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I had a cousin growing up, and we were inseparable. He passed away like the same day as late great Kurt Acid.
I saw that, and my
3
thoughts
hours
and
apart.
prayers.
3 hours apart, and we were inseparable. So like the area where Hazard and Parsley were running HCW at the time was a school or whatever,
Sure.
And obviously school's out for the summer, so they also had basketball courts. And every day, I was a big basketball guy. Me and my cousin go out there. We play ball every day, and I seen these guys wrestling over there. I'm like, what are they doing? My cousin, his name's Tyler. He's like, man, Chris, they ain't you. You should go over there and see if they'll let you wrestle with them. I'm like, nah, I'm not going to do it. And finally, he coaxed me into it. My cousin always coaxed me into stuff when we were younger. So finally, I said, I'll go talk to him. And I walked up to Hazard, and you got to think, 98, I'm 9 years old. Hazard's never been a small guy.
Yep.
He's always been, though, like 5'10" to 6'3", however tall he is now, and I'm just a little short. However old I was, however young, tall I was, 5'5", 5'4". I walk up, I'm like, hey, I'd like to wrestle with you guys. And Hazard was like, no. And I'm like, why not? He's like, I don't like you. And I never, till this day, don't know why Hazard didn't like me. I was a likable guy, but and he had this bright idea. He's like, fine. He said, I'll let you wrestle. One condition. I said, well, what's that? Because I was down for anything. He's like, let me power bomb you on the concrete.
That's quite a lift there. Literally.
Well, obviously, you think you tell somebody, let me power bomb on concrete, they're like, okay, no, I'm good. But I'm like, no, let's do this thing. So he power bombed me in Loper Elementary School, where I went to elementary school. Power bombed me on Loper's parking lot, and the rest was history. First show, I won my first match, which debuted as the Joker, which we brought that into XCW. Summer Mania 3 brought that into XCW. And won my first title in 7 seconds. It was the hardcore title. this is how unorganized things were back then. Hazard would go on to lose some championship, whatever belt he had, and he would be like, "Who's the hardcore champion at the time?" Which was my character, and like he just like I don't know what he did, but he did something, and I couldn't kick out. Like it was a 24/7 championship, and like it wasn't storyline. Like he legit pinned me. I couldn't kick out, lose the title. He rips off the Joker mask, and there I am.
Oh my God!
Brand new character, already ruined, but that would plant the seeds for what would become Chris Jones. Later on in the show, they would have a Royal Rumble style match. The winner would become the new HCW heavyweight champion. They drew names out of a hat. Lo and behold, whose name did they draw in their first show? They drew Chris Jones's name.
What a coincidence.
Yeah. I was also the last entrant. So I leave while they start the match because there's plenty of time. We had a whole bunch of random people there for this. And then I come back. I go to Blimpies, which no longer exists where I live. Get me
I do remember
sandwich.
Blimpies as a kid. Yes, we had a Blimpie where I grew up. I want to say about 5 blocks from my house at the time. Or Blimpie. I remember Blimpie very well. Sure.
Get me a sandwich, come back, make my entrant, and it comes down to like me, Hazard, Tsunami, or Ryan Wet Dream Riggs, as you might know from XCW, recently formally inducted into the Hall of Fame. And we eliminate whoever was the third person. Then it's down to me and Hazard. So mind you got to keep in mind, I'm booked to win this match for the heavyweight title. And Hazard picks me up, like, obviously I'm probably 120 pounds at the time.
Soaking wet, yeah.
Yeah, just picks me up and tries to throw me to eliminate me. I'm like, what's this guy doing? This is the second time, non-storyline event, like I'm supposed to win. Luckily, I've always been agile, so I was able to catch myself, make sure I stayed in the match. And then the next time he did, I just wasn't able to catch myself, and Hazard would go on to win the HCW championship. I think it was a little bit of new guy haze, maybe. Maybe they just didn't like my attitude back then. I'm sure we'll get into it when we get to early years in XCW, my cockiness and stuff like that. But I didn't win.
Well, I guess, look, I almost have to ask before I do get to comments. I have tons of them. I mean, do you ever regret that powerbomb that you took for that? What kind of started it off? What if you said, no, I don't want to get powerbombed? And you ever have a regret on that? I almost have to ask. I don't think anybody's ever asked you that before.
There's absolutely 100% zero regrets because you got to look at it like this. Like wrestling overall has had a big, big impact on many people in XCW's lives. Like if I don't take that powerbomb, I don't meet Fletch. Me and Fletch have been friends when I first met him, we weren't friends. I used to tease him all the time, but like we've been friends over 20 years. I go to Fletch's house for Thanksgiving, Christmas. Wow. I'm like the main person that's training his son, Jacoby.
Yes. And, I saw you and him have actually had some interesting promos between the two of you.
I don't meet Cynical, another one of my best friends over 20 plus years. And like the XCW landscape might be completely different. You got to think, you look at a lot of the current landscape in XCW, look at like the people that are known as like that veterans, like Corey Lee, Tommy Merriman. Do you know who their veteran was when they started?
Chris Jones.
I was one of those veterans. I was the one working with Corey Lee, Tommy Merriman. So like they wouldn't have like the insight. Like I'm not saying I was solely responsible for any of those people in no shape or form, but I was able to give them insight and stuff like that. Like that wouldn't exist.
But you know what that is? And I'll tell you what it is. And I promise I will get to comments in a second because I do this all the time and I do this all over the place. That is almost like what you just said is why I have said for as long as I've been on the air, which is almost 5 years, wrestling is like an apprenticeship. Even, yes, Corey Lee, the man has won all 7 of the belts in XCW. He learned from you. Tommy Merriman. Tommy obviously held the world title earlier this year. I mean, Tommy's obviously been a mainstay in the company for a long time. And even those guys who are the veterans now, and especially a Corey Lee, who many consider to be at the best in the business. I mean, you're obviously the best of all time. He had to learn. And wrestling is an apprenticeship. So in a lot of ways, you answered that question. Let me say hello to people here first. Let's say hello to, of course, our very good friends over at XCW. Well, maybe not so much later on, your very good friends, but for the general audience, obviously, if you want people, I knew you like that. If you want people to obviously support XCW, we can support them in all the socials. XCW Summermania 3, Joker vs. Donnie Dark on XCW Wrestling 1 on
Yep.
YouTube. Yeah, I have it as XCW Shelbyville if you want to go with the @ handles. But yes, the point is well taken. Go check that out. Speaking of people who are here with us, Mr. Parsley is himself, who has won his first XCW belt. He says, good old yard wrestling hazing. And also, Mr. Parsley is back doing podcasting. Before it was the Circle of Jerks. Now it's the Protect Life podcast. And he's doing some different things. He says hello. Want to say hello to my friend Ron, who is from the state of Pennsylvania, but is a Green Bay Packers fan. He's fretting the Packers game. We'll have no fear. Stay with us on Sportswire. Hi, Chris. Welcome to my dad's show. Have you wrestled him? I guess that's a line toward you. I will say hello to our friends over in the IMF who said nobody and nobody, meaning nobody. Also, XCW also wants to point out, yes, and we will certainly talk about the Hall of Fame and all that stuff here shortly in a second. So obviously, we spoke a little bit about some of the early introductions, but then talk to us in how you kind of get involved in XCW formally. As we know, XCW has recently been celebrating its 20 years, and about 20 years ago, you literally came in to XCW.
Exactly. We kind of have to talk about the story of like right before that happened. So like ultimately, I don't know exactly what happened, but Parsley and Hazard, I don't know if they would have like a difference of opinion or a disagreement, but
Yeah,
ultimately
we spoke about that, I think, when Justin was here. The whole
they
kind of
would
the drift off, the
they,
big,
they,
the
they would
big
drift apart. Hazard would go on to start SBW or NAW or however it worked back then. I can't remember everything.
Shelbyville Backyard Wrestling, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken.
Parsley would go on to start BYWE.
Yes.
And I just want to remind everybody, like, I didn't know these people personally. Like, it was Justin Parsley, Hazard, late great Kurt Acid. Like, I didn't know any of those people. Like, I didn't know any of these people, but apparently they had a draft. You know, they picked who they wanted, and the first pick, mind you, you would think Justin Parsley of all time would pick the Kurt Acid, like best friend.
I was going to say that, yeah.
You would think that, but no, he picked me. And like they
Why
told
do
me
you think
that,
he
I'm
did
like,
that
why?
then? Why?
And I didn't realize it till years later that I had the kid size intercontinental title. So I'm like, yeah, he probably wanted the belt. But,
you do have a nice belt collection, I hear. So I've heard.
I used to. I pretty much given all the belts to Fletch. But
oh, what a shock on that. Well, I'm sure we'll get into that.
We went into BYWE and like I didn't know a lot of these people, and that's where I, first instance with Fletch and a whole bunch of people you might know from XCW like DTC,
yes,
Kurt Acid, like I mentioned, the Soldier Nick Klaus, which hasn't been XCW for years. He was back then. A whole bunch of random people. And my time in BYW, granted, wasn't as great as it could have been. We were all younger. We all wanted to do different things. I believe a lot of the times I was kind of held down in BYWE. Granted, I was like one of the longest reigning intercontinental champions at the time. That's what their belt was called. And I never really got that shot for like the world title in BYWE. And then ultimately, we got in a car wreck once. I'm sure, I don't know if Fletch mentioned that or Parson mentioned that, but on the way to BYW
I don't
show,
think they did. No,
there's like 6 of us riding in this van. We had like one friend that had his license, and we got in a car wreck, almost died.
Oh my God! Now we'd never really be talking on Sportswire. I would not even know anything about you. My goodness! I mean, you almost have to talk about this because I did not hear this, and I think that there's an audience that would actually want to hear this.
Well,
what happened?
None of us had our license except for a wrestler known as Corruption, which recent XCW people might know. He made an appearance at the Kurt Acid Memorial Show, and I think he was at one of the Viewers' Choice Awards, which is my least favorite XCW show. We'll get into it later.
Yeah, sure.
But Corruption, only one with his license, so we all piled in this little van. Like it wasn't like a giant; it was a small van, and we had like DTC laying on the floor. Like we didn't want to walk, and like we always were going like all over town. We get kicked out of one spot, we go to another spot, and vice versa. And I don't know exactly like what led to the car wreck, but we ended up hitting something. We were all end up being okay, but like you got to think, a a whole bunch of like 11 to 16-year-olds getting in a car wreck on the way to a show. It's not a good look for us. Not a good look.
No, I mean, that's definitely one that could have easily been in a Shelbyville newspaper somewhere, but obviously it's a memory that'll definitely last a lifetime there. So, but do talk to me about all this stuff that we were getting into.
So ultimately, BYWE would essentially stop running at the time because obviously you get kicked out of too many different parks where wrestling at. Like, there's only so many locations.
Sure.
Fletch would decide, along with Dylan Bostic and Kurt Acid, that they were going to start XCW, which was almost XPW, Porch Wrestling, but they decided on XCW. And I didn't have a place to go. You know, I didn't know these guys. I wasn't friends with these guys. I was focused on like school sports and all this stuff. And I'm sitting on my roof one day, throwing water balloons at people as they ride by on their bicycles and stuff, being a menace to
Why
society.
am I not surprised you were throwing water balloons?
Being a menace to society. And I see Kurt Acid walk up. And like, I wasn't like big friends with him or anything like that. So I go and talk to him. He's like, "What do you think about XCW?" I'm like, "Sure, why not?" And that's pretty much how it happened. Fletch sent his little messenger guy, Kurt Acid, and he came and got me, and the rest is history. We walked around town. XCW started in 2003, but I would start April 16th, 2004. We walked all over town for a spot to wrestle. We even had a bird crap on one of our wrestlers' heads. That's
really a bird. Yes. Wow. Okay.
Yes, Vapor. I don't know how familiar you are with him.
Yeah, but, I've heard the name.
A bird would crap on Vapor's head, and we would end up calling him Shittles for the longest time. So,
wow. Well, I mean, I feel like I might have had that earlier in the week, but I'm glad I don't have it now. But I'm certainly glad I wasn't in that ring back 20 years ago. And let me get to some more comments here. And I want to say hello, especially to this young man who's a big fan of us here on Sportswire Radio. And his actually dad, if I can say it, is actually Mr. Omen Black, who Omen is, of course, the IMF champion of the world. And Omen certainly talks a lot bigger than these days with the likes of another champion that's kind of past news on Sportswire and Craven Rage. And he says, "My dad, Omen, he is going to XCW because Mr. Fletcher had announced that when Mr. Fletcher was on here. So obviously we certainly hope that Mr. Black maybe meets Mr. Jones in a life down the road in 2023. And he also says, "Chris, you are cool like my dad." Well, it is Omen's show, so we got to make sure we read the comments. So it was a kind of a playing joke. And also we get it here that BYWE coming soon to XCW All Access. You know what? Like you said about 10 minutes ago, what does it that we have in the XCW archive? So, I mean, that's that. I want to say hello to somebody else out there in California, Anastasia Racina, travel agent galore. She is out there watching us. So I say hello to a lot of different people out there tuned in. So, I mean, so we're starting in XCW, and you're starting to get success, and then you become a world champion in XCW. I mean, talk to me about that, because this is a championship that you've held 7 times. And when you've held this championship, it's probably when the championship's been most relevant, because you have been a champion 11 times in a company that will definitely spend a lot of time on for sure very soon.
Well, it's interesting because I'm sure it was never really planned originally. Like, obviously, we didn't have like big storylines or anything like that, but like, when I debuted April 16th, 2004, one big thing that they introduced was the XCW Power Championship at the time. And it was a big battle royal. Everybody was in it. And mind you, I didn't know these people very well. But I almost got fired that show because people kept jumping in and interfering in a match between Fletch and Kurt Acid for the XCW Championship at the time. But I almost got fired that day. But we had a big battle royal. And ultimately, the final 2 people would be Cynical and Chris Jones. And that feud would go on to be probably the #1 XCW feud of all time. And we shook hands at the end of this match without even knowing what would spawn of it. So then you go to May 7th, 2004. Chris Jones, Cynical. I don't know why I had the bright idea to come out on a moped, but I was still kind of
At that time, a moped, not many people had a
yeah.
moped. So, I mean, now like a moped is like in vogue. 20 years ago, if you would have had a moped, it would have been like you said, 1996, you started wrestling. In 1996, nobody had a computer really. Nobody
Yeah.
had the internet. It's almost like having a moped then 20 years ago. You're ahead of your time even then, sir.
I didn't really know like what my character was back then.
How much
We
did
were
that cost you? I'm almost scared to ask.
I have no idea. It was a Christmas present. We had two of
Oh,
them
I'm
at
sure
home.
that was like 10 Christmas gifts.
But I didn't really know what my character was. We were kind of going for like a John Cena clone kind of at first.
You do have a little bit of the look. I could see it. I could see
But
it.
May 7th, I wrestled Cynical. Trampoline, obviously, was a start. May 14th, I beat Cynical for the Power title and the infamous Rain Show. May 21st, I go on to be the XCW champion, which I'm still confused on why I never got a world title shot after beating Kurt Acid when he was XCW champion. I think that should have made me number one contender, but we would go
somebody
on.
clearly when they were booking these things was like, he's the number one contender. Why doesn't he get a title shot? I don't know.
Now, Kurt Acid was going on to feud with DTC, which he would lose the XCW championship at Extreme King. I know I'll be corrected later if I'm wrong. Extreme King 2004.
Yes, you will be. Yes, you
DTC
will be.
Beat Kurt Acid in a table match. I would go on to win Extreme King. My first season, you got to think about this. Second show, Power Championship win. A few shows later, Extreme King winner. And at that time, when you won Extreme King, instead of going on to Summer Mania, you went on to Greed. Yep. That's why if you've ever seen like some old promos, like when I occasionally mention Greed's Chris Jones's favorite show or the biggest show of the year, it's because it was my first XCW championship. Sure. And we would have, I think, the first ever actual like TLC match, me versus DTC. And ultimately, I would go on to defeat DTC. And that somehow would eventually catapult me to being the leader of New Power Generation at the time, which was supposed to be led by either Vapor or Dylan Bostic. And we were feuding VK2, which was Cynical, Fletch, and DTC. And a little unknown fact, Chris Jones's face turn was almost in 2004. I almost was supposed to eventually swap places with DTC, but luckily no shows and storylines change, and I stayed a heel. And I think for the betterment of storylines, which eventually Cynical would win at Summer Mania 2, beat me at Halloween Havoc, and we would go on again to wrestle for the world title again. He would also defeat me at Summer Mania 2. And what I say is Chris Jones's worst match ever.
Really? Why do you say that it's your worst match ever? I'm curious because guys usually come on here and talk about their best matches ever, but you just said that was your worst match ever. So why would you say that for the audience listening?
It sticks with me so much because of how, like, you talk about me being potentially the greatest wrestler of all time or the greatest backyard wrestler and all this stuff. Is like stuff like that kind of sticks with you, and you don't forget like your worst of matches. And Cynical, not a big giant wrestling fan, but come over for all the pay-per-views and did the show with Fletch and all this stuff. Another excellent wrestler. You think you put two people together and you should be able to create just instant magic no matter the situation. It was first ever trunk match in XCW. Cynical was working at Wendy's at the time. He got off work. He had to open. He was in a bad mood.
I always liked Wendy's, by the way, more than I liked Burger King and McDonald's, if that makes him feel better.
Well, funny thing is, I was working at McDonald's around that time, so we had Wendy's versus McDonald's, which is okay. I understand. I like Wendy's way more than McDonald's.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Cynical would slam the trunk door on my head, like not even on purpose. Like the match just did not go well at all, and it should have been, you would think, 4 or 5-star match, and it was just terrible. Post match, Cynical and Fletch would almost get in a fight, and that didn't happen very often at all. And you want to talk about your best matches all time, you can't have your best matches without your worst matches.
Well, it's funny you did say that as we're speaking here with the legendary Chris Jones. You can follow him on Instagram. You can follow him on Twitter, and we've actually got it here right for you to do it. through the links below on Twitter at CUnit123123 and on Instagram, CUnit Chris Jones. My name is the Reverend Tom Bryce. You can catch us here on YouTube at Sportswire Radio, also sportnarium.com/player, and on Facebook at Sportswire Radio. And I am your voice of all wrestling. And I had a guy on, Dean Allmark, who had a stint in TNA in the UK. He is considered wrestling royalty. He's wrestled Who's Who of Legend, and he actually talked about his experience in TNA was the worst thing. Well, his first match in TNA was the worst thing that ever happened to him. He wrestled S.A. Rios under a different name, but he actually said that actually helped him in terms of having some of the best matches afterwards. So maybe there is something where, you know what, you're motivated, you're fired up, you've got this long-lasting memory that you kind of want to improve or perform better than the way you did. Maybe that's what propelled you not only after that, but for the rest of your career.
Yeah, definitely is a big motivation factor. And I could count on one hand the number of, matches I think were absolutely terrible that I've been in. And like there's one time in XCW where I played 4 characters. So I'm talking about all 4 of these characters. Like the worst matches, ironically, that I've had have mainly been the couple Chris Jones matches. Like I played Joker for many years, and then ultimately Corey Lee would take over. Dylan Bostic was the first Psycho Circus clown. Then I took over for majority and been the main Psycho Circus. Then Brendan Stickle would take over. And then ultimately LOL would pretty much retire after a lot of my gear just being ruined. And obviously I'm a bigger guy. I can't fit in LOL's gear anymore. But it's just, you can't have the good without the bad. And you just got to take it and let it motivate you, because everybody has a bad match.
Oh, listen, now that I completely agree with you. You probably had, 1,000, 2,000 matches in your career, and you are going to have those moments. It's like everybody else. I mean, listen, there's no question that you're not wrong at all on that. And I also want to say hello to Mr. Omen Son again. He says, can I come to XCW with my dad and meet you guys? Well, that's up to your dad, Omen Black. I mean, I'm sure Mr. Black, when he travels to XCW and he comes into the state of Indiana from Iowa, I'm sure that you guys can all arrange that. And who knows, maybe one day we'll see you in the ring. Maybe we'll see you here on Sportswire Radio speaking with us. So I definitely appreciate that you're tuning in here. But, I wanted to ask you something in a general about your career. And I realize I could talk about hundreds of matches. I realize I will do some of that. But you've actually won, when you think about XCW and EBW, and I'm sure some other companies come into that, you've actually won more championships in your career than actually years you've wrestled. Very few people can say that. Do you ever think about that? You've won over 20 championships in your career. You've wrestled over 20 years. I mean, very few people can say it. Flair can't say that. Everybody says, oh, Flair, he's 16-time champion. But okay, maybe with the other titles, he's won 30 championships, but Flair's wrestled like 500 years. You, on the other hand, my friend, have wrestled over 20 years and actually have over 20 championships. So the way it works, you've actually won a championship every year. I mean, you are the definition of a champion. What is that like? Have you ever thought about that?
It's not as heavy as you kind of put it there.
I try.
It's been if I think about it just on the spot, it's kind of like, it's a little bit surreal, because I never thought that a person needed a championship to be relevant. Sure. It was always, Fletch is like, hey, I need you to do this. Can you do it? I'm like, let's do it. But you go back and look at a lot of like my most recent like big storyline feuds is like, I main evented my last 2 years ago. I main evented against Brogan O'Shea Summermania, and no belt was on the line. I main evented. Well, technically the EBW championship was on the line, but gave Miano Diaz his first main event ever in my return match. Yep. And just throughout my career, like, I always liked when a wrestling match didn't need a championship to make it like a relevant story. I always thought that those were interesting. But for the people that I've wrestled with, Fletch, Justin Parsley, I've held championships in BYW, UIW, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. But for them to put that trust is like, hey, we know if we give Chris the world championship, he'll be able to go out there and do this, get this person over, tell this story. So it's kind of surreal that you mentioned like a championship every year of my career. Like,
that's the average. Crazy. I mean, that's the average. And there are very few people that can go out and say, "Hey, I've done that." Usually it's okay. I remember winning this championship, and I won maybe a couple of other titles, but your career in 2 decades plus, you've won a championship a year, and very few people. That's a hard thing to kind of say, and that's why I thought it was kind of interesting to put it. But you also say something that I hear guys come on here in Sportswire and talk about. Some guys come on here and tell me, yeah, I've been the champion for 500 days. I'm the greatest. Then there are other guys like you. Realistically, you know what? It's about actually trying to tell a story in the ring, being
Yep.
able to kind of progress, have a linear flow, and also be able to do something where people want to continue to see and invest in you and maybe invest in your opponent. And I think that that's why, if I could take a step back, whether it's been EBW, XCW, especially in these 20 years, why do I think that XCW has been the gold standard along with EBW in this underground YouTube wrestling, whatever you want to call it, is because there's always been a flow. There's always been an investment in original creativity in the storylines. And talk to us about how important that's been for not only yourself, but maybe everybody else that's been involved in these companies, because that's why I say again, time after time on Sportswire, you guys have set the standard, and that's why you are the gold standard when it comes to all of this.
It's definitely, like you mentioned a second ago, it's like people come on and brag about, 584 days.
We
It's
have a
like,
guy that comes on here in a mask and he says, I'm the greatest, and yeah, I'm great. And it's fun, but it's there's no depth to it. There's no nothing to it.
yeah,
XCW to me, it's never that. XCW never has that issue whatsoever. That's why I'm always so happy to talk XCW and have somebody like yourself on who knows something and can share that not only for the audience, but the wrestlers who are going to come in and watch this after we're off the air.
I've had like I want to say like ranked like the least, I think, of like hierarchy of championships in XCW, like is like the hardcore title or the New Age championship. And like I think I've had the New Age championship twice, and I think both times were very short reigns.
Mm-hmm.
And reason being is to create new storylines. We had a big powwow with multiple superstars in the ring of who thinks they should wrestle for who one time at a cemetery arena. And I would wipe my butt with the New Age championship, try to keep the cussing to a minimum. But
Appreciate that very much. We are a family show in Sportswire.
I'd wipe my butt with the New Age championship, and instantly, instead of, I don't care about this championship, I'd immediately walk over to Tommy. And that would Chris Jones and Tommy, and like that would create a new opportunity for two other people to wrestle for the New Age championship. And then I had a very short reign. I won at one show, and then I lost at the next show to Genocide to set Genocide up for the feud that he was going to have. So like, it doesn't matter if you've been Roman Reigns, who's been champion for like 3 or 4 years. It matters. It matters of what you get out of that particular story feud. It matters who gets put over in the end. Like you said, it's about that story. It's about what keeps eyes on that
Absolutely.
particular story.
To me, it's almost like driving a car. It's almost like I have to go somewhere when I'm driving a car. I can't just stay in the car for the rest of my life. I want to start and I want to end somewhere. And then obviously I want to do something in between it. And I think that that's what has set XCW apart. And that's why XCW has, to me, been the gold standard. And I'm not just saying it because you're here. I'm saying because I watch the product and I don't do anything unless I believe in it. And I see what you guys have done. And I'm glad that you explained that, because other guys that have come on here who've been in other places who are the pros say the same thing. And management would like to say, well, I think it's Fletch saying this, but I'm going to play along the same management. Cheated for over half of them. But we digress. Well, I do want to ask you about some other companies that you have done other than EBW. I will come to that, but I did want to ask you about something that wrapped up. Well, really, this is where the first place I formally got to know you a little bit. Even though I've known Mr. Fletcher for a while, we've only started working with you guys on Sportswire for about 3 or so months from now. But you were the host for 6 years for No False Finish. And I'm actually kind of bummed that the show kind of is ceasing to exist. And I kind of see why. It was kind of some hints that this was actually going to happen because we saw some of the EBW things and it didn't really click until, well, I watched obviously EBW kind of reform in our own very eyes. But I mean, I'll get to that. But I mean, talk to me about, do you miss hosting that show? I mean, even if it was EBW false finish, whatever else you want to call it. But I mean, talk to me about, what led you to want to host that show. And what I appreciated was you were a really good host. You always had me
Thank you.
interested. You were invested. Trust me, I'm a host. I do this in all different types. So if I'm interested, there's a lot of guys that give me their podcast they're on. And I'm like, that's boring. It's like I'm bored and there's no flow. You were entertaining. You had good questions. And even Mr. Fletcher off the air was like, yeah, he was good. And you could tell Mr. Fletcher was gritting his teeth that you were a good host. So talk to me almost about, do you miss the show? What did you get from that? Because I really think that's where I kind of learned and got a sense to know you and where we are right now.
Well, ultimately, I never wanted to host the show, if we're going to be honest.
Boy, why did I fall right into that one?
XCW had this, it's labeled as like a controversial interview thing that Fletch and Hazard did for Facebook. And there's no one more controversial than Chris Jones.
Yeah, true.
I'm like, excuse me. I'm like, why don't we do this again? But you have me as a guest. Like, I think that is a great thing. It could be something. And ultimately, Fletcher's like, I have an idea. Why don't you do it and host the show? I'm like, oh, man, here we go. Fletcher's got an idea in his head. So at the time, I didn't drive. So I would ride to the shows with Fletch, and we pull up to pick up Jacoby one day at his grandparents' house. Mm-hmm. And he's like, no false finish. And I'm like, what? He's like, think about it. No false finish. I'm like, sounds kind of cool, but what? What's it for? He's like, it's for the show that you're going to host. I'm like, oh, I'm going to host the show. He's like, yeah. He's like, it'll be kind of like, and he described it like, I can't remember the WWE shows, but like there was a show like JBL used to host, I think, like that. And it'd be like something to wrestle with Bruce Pritchard and
yeah. Eric Bischoff has one now. It's was it 87 weeks, I think, or something like that.
But we were going to sit down, come up with questions. I'd ask people, talk about XCW history. We could talk about certain XCW shows, which is what we did because essentially until season 6, the final season, we had split it in like half the shows would be me and Fletch, and we talk about XCW shows. The other half would be special guests. But over the years, I've done many things for many people. So you could say Chris Jones has had a lot of favors to cash in. And I'm a likable guy. Like, there might be some people that might not want to come back for XCW, but if Chris Jones asks them to come be on his show, we never thought that Justin Parsley would even be doing what he isn't doing in XCW. He's doing excellent. He's the tag team champion.
I tell you what, I think that's really, to me, the biggest surprise, maybe other than EBW's Justin Parsley is finally in XCW. And on top of that, he's got gold. I mean, thank you very much, Chris Jones, Justin Parsley. I mean, I hope that you make sure you give Mr. Jones a nice Christmas card at the end of the year.
But I would say, I don't say like the primary reason for Parsley being a part of XCW is like the episode that he was on.
But that was a big topic, though. Listen, we had him on here. It was a storyline, and it was almost like Fletch and Parsley. It was like never happened. It was like it was never going to happen. It was no chance that was going to happen, and it finally happened.
It was definitely a big step, and like I was on Parsley's first episode, Circle of Jerks podcast.
Yes,
the very first
I listened
episode.
To that, by the way. I listened
and,
to it.
I was on there, and so ultimately, like I kind of cashed in the favor. I'm like, hey, I'd like to come do my show. And Parsley, Justin was always willing. He's always been a good friend to me as well. You look at like the likes of Austin Chaos, which you haven't seen in XCW in years. We had Austin Chaos. Yeah. We had just all these people you might not have seen. I had Emily Moore, and you don't understand how hard it is to get Emily Moore in just a promo, like a 1 to 3 minute promo. Like, she hates doing promos, hates being on camera. I got Emily Moore for a whole episode, no false finish, which was 30 to 45 minutes.
Yeah, usually the shows are about like 35 to 40 minutes, I've noticed. Yep, and watching.
And then like we got We got Gabe. We've had, Carnage, just a whole bunch of like Matt Chincho, just so many big and special guests. And I think the reason why, like, some people might think I'm a good host is just for the simple fact is I'm not afraid to do research and dig up some like tough questions to ask people. Like, I didn't just ask like, how was your career, favorite match, favorite superstar, all this. Like, I asked some personal, hard hitting questions. You go like, I even let the voice of XCW, JJ, even interviewed myself, and there were some hard hitting questions for Chris Jones. And I think,
and I could see that. And I also think what was good about it was that you were a contemporary and a peer to many of these people. So it was almost a relatable experience. It was almost like you wanted to hear what one of your guests had to say because you faced off with them in a ring. You know them well. And I think that's what made the show so successful. And you got to learn a lot about the history of the company while still being in the present. I think that's why the show was so successful, to be honest.
and I think just as time went on with No False Finish, like No False Finish was a hit from the get go. Should have won Best Internet Show 3 years in a row, but
I did hear you
somehow
say that. Yep.
somehow we lost the Dinner of Destruction, which still boggles my mind to this day. And but over time, obviously, you eventually kind of run out like the big gets. Like, don't get me wrong, like if I could have got Dylan Bostic or something like that, like I could have probably squeezed out some more guests, but like just like the views weren't where I personally would want them to be. And like 6 years is a long time. Like No False Finish besides like XCW 5. I think that might be the longest reigning XCW sideshow now. It's like
Well,
6 years is a long time.
Well, they say in TV land that when you hit 5 years, that means you go to syndication. So you win 6. That means you went right above 5. They say any successful TV show in the real world, if you hit 5 years, that means you hit, if you do the math, 100 episodes. That means technically you guys were in syndication. So there obviously was a lot of success. And that's why we're very honored here to have on the legendary Hall of Famer himself, Mr. Chris Jones, who, of course, is a huge part of things now as a part of EBW, which is running roughshod. They're the most dominant group right now in this entire sport, not just XCW, but the entire sport. He is here to talk about all of that and some, and of course, our friends over at XCW, which you can follow on Twitter at XCW Wrestling One, YouTube at XCW Shelbyville, Instagram XCW_Shelbyville, Facebook at XCW Shelbyville. And my name is your boy, the host of the Sports Report, the owner of Sportzwire Radio, your voice of all wrestling, the Reverend Tom Bryce. I'm going to be back here 3 times tomorrow. So if you're sick of me today, wait until you get a load of me tomorrow, as Jack Nicholson famously said in the Batman movie as the Joker, because we are going to have on, speaking of the Joker here and Chris Jones, I'm going to have on Moses Ireton to kick things off here, 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time. He is apparently a man who owns 1,000 banks. He is the CEO of Ireton Enterprises. He has over 11,000 followers on Instagram. He's going to talk about his match coming up here for Redemption Championship Wrestling Saturday night in North Carolina. We're going to have him at 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time. Then 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, 10 o'clock British Standard Time, we're going to have on the owner and CEO and promoter of Colory Championship Wrestling. Speaking of colorful figures, that is Mr. James Barris himself. And Mr. Barris is going to be in who knows what kind of mood. He's going to talk about anything that's on his mind. And it has been a hot skip in a minute since Mr. Barris has been back on Sportswire Radio, and he has a lot to get off his chest. And I'll be back, oh, by the way, a little after 10 o'clock Eastern Time to give you your week 4 in the NFL. I'll pick all the games with you, and we'll talk about all that and some. But in the meantime, we are here right now with the legendary himself, Mr. Chris Jones. And also, I got a couple of more comments. I want to say hello to somebody here in Australia. He's also a podcaster. He's the host of the Wired Up podcast, and he just had a guy you actually probably have heard of named Aaron Blaze. Yeah, you definitely know that name. That name I know you definitely know a little bit of because we've seen him around. And obviously, Mr. Blaze was on Mr. Ace Reed show of the Wired Up podcast. That's on Instagram. He says good day because it's 12:52 p.m. time in Australia, so 14 hours ahead. Also, we get here XCW5's current run is on season 5, so thank you for that confirmation. So great stuff. Okay, so I do want to get into the future and some other awards in a second, but I do want to talk about and give you the opportunity now to talk about some other places that you've mentioned that you've been a part of. And so for the audience listening and watching on Sportswire Radio, tell us some of those memories.
Well, I can say like 2009 to 2010, there was a lot of heat between, which for a long time, it's not unknown, but like there's a lot of heat between Fletch and Justin Parsley. And
We had it
2009,
here. We had it here. I might
2009,
be the cause of
2010.
some of that because I think we had them both on right around the time the match was being promoted. So there you go.
But I've always been of the mind, never forget where you came from. And everybody knows Chris Jones from XCW, but Chris Jones came from Justin Parsley. So no matter how much Fletch hated Justin or how much Justin hated Fletch, I was always going to support Justin Parsley in some way. And I did just that. And when UIW came in existence, Ultimate Impact Wrestling, and, went on to do some things I never got to do with Justin Parsley in general. Like I never got a chance to win the world title for any of Parsley's companies until UIW. We had a lot more storyline-oriented product. A lot of stuff that caused animosity is there's a decent amount of XCW people coming over to UIW. We had Corey Lee. There was Tommy Merriman, Stephen Raines, Brandon Hobbs, which would ultimately change to KC2 Crazy. Hazard was there for a very short time. And a big thing that caused a lot of animosity is that we used the XCW name on UIW television.
Yeah, I think that came up in in the Parsley Fletch promos.
Yeah.
Yep.
We used the UIW without Fletch's used XCW without Fletch's permission. And granted, I might have helped convince some of like the XCW guys to come over and wrestle, but like everybody made their own decision. Like I'm not Corey Lee's boss. I'm not Tommy's boss, Hazard's. Like everybody makes their own adult decision. So we all on our own decided to come over there and wrestle more. And like at the time, I was still about wrestling as much as I possibly can. Corey Lee, still relatively newer to XCW scene, wanted to wrestle as much as possible. And ultimately, XCW would lose in the final feud between UIW, and I think that caused even more animosity. But cooler heads have prevailed 10 or so years later, and we got Parsley as XCW Tag Team Champion.
It only took, though, over 10 years, though. I mean, time, as I asked Parsley, I'm like, do you ever really wish that the time would have, been a little shorter in that gap? And he said, well, there was just, like you said, different things. There was egos, personalities, and it is what it is. I mean, you can't go back in time. You can't change the past. You can only learn from it and go forward.
And in UIW, we got the team with Parsley for the first time, which was cool to me because we had never been on the same team. It was always Chris versus Parsley.
Yeah, I can see you guys actually, personality-wise, far more aligned than you and Mr. Fletcher. I could see it already. I could totally see it.
I think when me and Fletch teamed up as Shelbyville Heat, we never won any tag team gold, but like there's people that say like their favorite iteration and their favorite tag team was Shelbyville Heat with Chris Jones and Fletch, which was shocking to me because like we didn't do anything major. Like we had literally had singles feuds, but for people to say like Shelbyville Heat, Chris Jones and Fletch, best tag team of all time, it's shocking to me. And ultimately, that would lead, you mentioned a Fletch would, I said, cheat to win, but Emily Moore put us in a bad situation at one point, and I think it was Emily Moore would put us in a bad situation. Chris Jones versus Fletch, best friends, winner gets number one contendership for the world title. Fletch would beat me. I turned my back on Fletch after being friends for so many years, Shelbyville Heat and all that, break his leg, and I would go on to get that world championship shot, and that's when Brother Jones and XCW would come about. But I kind of would say Parsley would always turn his back on me and kind of rubs me the wrong way, Justin. We'll get into that at some point.
Well, I'm gonna come into the current, and I really am, because I want to spend time on. I don't want this just to be go down memory lane show, but I do actually have Mr. Parsley here, and I have a couple more comments I want to get to people to say hello, because I have a lot of people that want to say hello. He says, Chris, I love you, bro. I'm getting you a Christmas card and putting you over. I said, I told you I opened up a keg of worms here. And Mr. Parsley, by the way, he messaged me the other day and said that he was going to be very closely listening to this one. And he already said he wants to come back on Sportswire. And then Mr. Fletcher had said exactly the same thing, but it certainly didn't bring up the Christmas card part. So, I mean, I'm going to get to everybody. I promise you on that. I want to say hello to somebody that is obviously a huge part of things in XCW, and that is somebody that I know very well who is a couple of different names. But I guess in this, should I call him Jackson Law? Should I call him Captain Law here? But I'll just say Mr. Law, as I always say. Hey, it's the man. I got fired. Then he says, "What's up?" Anything you want to say to Mr. Law?
Well, just wait till Mr. Thomas Bryce talks about my return, Dale. You're not going to
We're
want to
going to get
miss.
to that. Yeah, give me about 15 to 20
You're not
minutes.
going to want to miss that, Dale. So stay tuned.
I'm going to get to that. Give me 15 minutes. I really wanted to say that for the end of the show, and I want to say hello to our friend over at ROEW, the wild card, Jason Storm. I hope he is doing okay because he had some dental work done last week, and I hope that he is still doing well. And obviously, his beautiful wife is expecting, so I want to make sure I say hello to Mr. Storm. So I want to ask you a general question, and I'll come to the current in a few minutes. I promise, because I do really want to get into that a lot.
Take your time.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I could take all day, but I don't have a voice for all day. But I did want to ask you, what does it mean to you, though, to be a Hall of Famer? You know, to be in 2 Hall of Fames. You know, it's one thing, as I open in my monologue, you know, you're a Hall of Famer, but it's a really important milestone and accomplishment. And, you know, what does that mean to you to be a Hall of Famer, especially an XCW and EBW one?
A lot of people would think, like, Hall of Fame, backyard wrestling, like, doesn't really mean anything. And there's 2 awards at the Viewers' Choice Awards that I care about. I don't care about any other awards. I'm just being completely honest. Mm-hmm. That's the Hall of Fame and the Honor Award. It's the 2 awards that can't be really fudged very much. But you got to think, when I was inducted to the Hall of Fame in 2005 alongside Fletch, like, that wasn't the Chris Jones that you know today. That wasn't the like Chris Jones. That was the cocky, the arrogant, make enemies. Like, I played that character like 24. That was me. I was a walking young Randy Orton, you know, the type of Randy Orton that would do bad stuff to people in WWE. Like,
yep, the legend killer. Yep, the legend killer.
I was just that arrogant guy. And I think it means more that I was inducted like in that era of like my Chris Jones mentality, because that means that people really thought I was that person that deserved to be there, instead of, you know, when somebody's like a good guy, a more likable guy, well, we like him, let's put him there. No, this was a kid that was hated inside wrestling, outside wrestling, and they put me there. And that's why it means a lot. And not just the fact that I get to be in the XCW Hall of Fame alongside a lot of other people. It's like a lot of people look up to you when you're the veteran in the business for over 20 years. A lot of people look up to you when you're the Hall of Fame. Like, I can't tell you how many people come up and ask me for like advice. Like, I passed the torch to Brogan after that death match because I thought he is that next Chris Jones. And Brogan still comes up. He's like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about the angle on this? And like, even like Miano Diaz or like Brady Branson's, like, people still ask me for my opinion, even like when I was out of XCW. So for people to still value my opinion and like the legacy I've been able to leave on XCW over the past 20 years, it means a lot.
No, and I think it would, and I don't care in whatever it is, right? To be in a Hall of Fame, it doesn't matter if it's backyard wrestling, it doesn't matter if it's college basketball. I do a lot of college basketball here in New York, or college soccer, or high school, whatever it is. I think a Hall of Fame, that's the highest honor that your peers can bestow upon you. I mean, you think about Hall of Fame, right? There are very few people, when you think about a Hall of Fame, when we think about sports, right? A Hall of Fame, there's very few people that are in the Hall of Fame. So I would have to think that certainly being in a Hall of Fame is really the greatest honor that your peers can bestow upon you. And again, it goes back to what you're trying to do in the locker room in trying to help these talent, going back to what I had said a little while ago about having a flow and trying to invest in the storylines and the wrestlers. And I think that that's what you do so well. And I think that's what you bring to the table here. And I do want to get to some comments here. He says, Hall of Fame worthy career. What's the FR reference though? What's the
for real?
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's no question. Your career, I said it, over 20 championships you've won. You've won a world title over almost a dozen times. You've won a number of the XCW major milestones. You've been in multiple companies. And on top of that, you've probably done more outside the ring. And oh, by the way, you did host No Falls Finish for almost 6 years. That's to me a Hall of Fame just on that. So, and by the way, you were inducted into the Hall of Fame at a young age, and you're still going. So, I mean, that shows you some things here. I want to say hello to Adonis Felios of WCE. And speaking of people in the current that you've trained, right before I get into some of the current stuff, speaking of the next generation of Fletchers that might be pains in your butt, Jacoby is here with us. And anything you want to say to Jacoby, who, by the way, seems to get more traction than some XCW shows these days?
Well, you haven't, I'll just say this. You haven't seen the last interaction between Chris Jones and the Monster Jacoby in a ring. We'll just say that.
Okay, well, I'm going to certainly plead the fifth. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm certainly not going to say anything at all toward that. But obviously, I do want to start getting into, because just for the amount of time, the current now. I want to come back into the current in EBW. I mean, this is where I know you most in the current. I'm getting to watch the current. I know we obviously have had different, incarnations. You've had your own company in EBW. Maybe I'll touch upon that. But, I said it a few minutes ago. This EBW is the most dominant group, I think, in this entire sport right now. The group that you have amassed in the size, the strength, and the emerging list of championships that you've had. I mean, this might actually be your greatest work yet, and you don't hold the championship in the moment. And let's talk about EBW as what I said in introducing you a few days ago is XCW on its final legs. Finally, we spoke about the 20 years. We spoke about this history. But it seems like to me, the next time I might have you on, somebody else from this company, I could maybe well be looking at EBW. Follow EBW on all the EBW socials. What's your thoughts on all that?
Well, it's definitely different than the first iteration. You go back and you look at like 2013, 14, like that era.
Fletch was an EBW. I mean, I'll get to that.
Fletch did wrestle in EBW as a wrestler back when it was an actual like full blown company. But like back in 2013, 14, that era when EBW first came about, you look at some of the people we had back then. Outside myself and Brandon Hobbs, till we kicked Brandon Hobbs out in that story. Genocide too. Can't forget Genocide. Like we had Austin Chaos, we had Mitchell Maverick, Zach Washington, James Cerebral, all like newer. Like they weren't brand new, but like they were coming into like their own. Like I had led a faction before that EBW that was the Untouchables before Fletch broke my leg and I was off for a year. And James Cerebral was starting to come into his own in that. So we got to catapult James Cerebral into a new platform. Obviously, EBW, a big thing, trying to invade. And not only just catapulting some of the newer stars like Austin, like Mitchell, Zach Washington, but like EBW was like that primary focus. And like Brandon Hobbs found that out when Brandon Hobbs, I think, beat Matt Chincho for the world title. And we jumped Brandon Hobbs like nobody's bigger than EBW. And it gave platform for those newer superstars, like I mentioned, to be able to shine and kind of get that rub. Kind of like if you look at like a legacy from WWE, like Randy Orton, Cody Rhodes, and Ted DiBiase.
Yep.
The whole group was for
even Evolution, Flair,
Triple H, exactly.
Randy Orton. You can look.
We gave them that platform to be able to show really what they have and like to be a main focus of a storyline. Because you think when there's not like a big stable, a lot of people kind of don't get to shine, so to speak. So they might not get like that TV time. Well, they got this TV time, and ultimately we got to do some shocking stuff. Like Fletch played both sides. He was never XCW, never EBW, but he kind of played both sides.
Fletch even trying to inject like a lethal dose or lethal poison into his company? Didn't he say at one point?
We'll get there. We'll get exactly to that. So it culminated into like. Sometimes in wrestling, it's hard to keep a secret. But
you know what's funny you said that? As somebody who has several wrestlers a week. I tell everybody that comes on the sports pod, there's guys that say, ooh, I want to tell you what happens. You know what I tell them all the time? Whatever you do, don't tell me because it'll come up on Sportswire, and then the promoter will say, Tom Bryce, what happened?
But we kept a pretty big secret. We were going to shock the world. Like, if you remember when Brock Lesnar beat The Undertaker's streak, we had
everybody was
pause.
like, what?
Everybody was shocked.
Yes.
No music played. No, even Paul Heyman freaked out.
Yep.
Like, we did that. Earlier in the show, I think it was earlier that show, we had the Gabe versus Brendan Stickle in a tuxedo match. The winner would go on to be the referee for EBW versus XCW, where whoever won, that's the company that would reign supreme. And Brendan Stickle would go down, and Gabe would come in and would kind of distract Corey Lee. And I hit Corey Lee with his own move, the FML. I'd pin Corey Lee 1, 2, 3. EBW wins. But Gabe did the count. No music, no nothing played. James Cerebral's face was shocked because you would think the storyline's obviously going to end, XCW Supreme, yada, yada, yada. But, like, people were shocked. Like, we didn't, like, very small amount of people, maybe 3 or 4 people knew this was going to happen. And, like, me and Gabe just started celebrating. I think I dumped a water bottle on my head. Woo, EBW's #1 on top. And, like, the announcers were getting ready to cut the shows. Like, I guess we'll see you next. And right when he said that, Emily Moore's music plays. Emily Moore comes out, ruins EBW's days. Like, you know, Gabe did not win the tuxedo match. Brendan Stickle is the actual referee. So this match will be restarted. So Chris Jones and Corey Lee restart. We're going at it. Next thing you know is Genocide comes out, shows that he was completely Benedict Arnold turncoat, hits me with the 187. 1, 2, I kick out. Then we go for the big spot, FML off the shed. XCW reigns supreme. All those guys get catapulted to, like, world titles and different stuff. And you fast forward, I had no plans to come back. My last match was always planned to be the death match with Brogan. I passed the torch to Brogan. He's the Chris Jones now. I'm not there to, you know, step on any toes. I'm not there for any championships or anything like that. As you can see, first match back, I beat the holy hell out of Miano Diaz. And then I said, now it's your time to prove what you got. It's your time for that shine. First ever main event, first ever world title match. Miano Diaz is now world champion for EBW.
That was a shocker. I mean, I'm almost speechless that Miano Diaz became EBW. Nobody saw that one coming. I mean, that was really, to me, completely out of left and right field.
Ironically, a lot of people thought it was going to be Patrick O'Reilly, which I don't know why people thought that, but they thought that.
Well, he's tasted it twice now. He's been on 2 ends of it now.
But originally, like I said, never planned to come back. I was fine being on the sidelines, letting XCW, because they got plenty of people. They don't need Chris Jones. Well, fast forward. So I make sure I stay active. Like, I take long walks and jogs and stuff like that. And me and Brady Branson, outside wrestling, we're pretty good friends. And, like,
sure,
we talk about the business, talk about several things. And we go on a walk periodically. And Fletch's house is like the halfway mid stop.
Oh, wow.
So we might take a break like there. And we stopped by his house one day. We're sitting on the porch. He's like, I'll be candid. He's like, man, XCW views are down. And he tried to come up with an idea. He's like, what if we did EBW once again? And even though it was, like, mentioned like that, like, it was never 100% confirmed I was going to be a part of it. There was a chance that I was just going to sit out and just let it ride and let somebody else be that person.
So you were retired. I mean, you were basically like, you were done. You were basically, and we thought even with no false finish ending that this was it. Like, you were, you know what, you were into the sunset. You had done it. You've been in your career. And I mean, there was no guarantees.
But I'm like, give me some time to think about it. And like Jackson Law had previously mentioned, he did interfere in that match for the cost Fletch the match. The big thing was, it was, you know, Luke Blaze's team wins, Chris Jones is gone. Chris Jones' team wins, Luke Blaze is gone. And Fletch told me he had my back. So anytime, a little bit of history, anytime Chris Jones's career's been on the line, and I've been the one to wrestle. I've never lost, obviously. But when I came back in 2020 or 2019, I wrestled Venom. Venom had that monster streak,
Yep.
longest world XCW champion. I
Mhm.
put my career, Hazard's, Fletch, and Genocide's career on the line to prove a point. Like, I was that confident once and for all we could slay the monster, and I did that. So you go to this match, Fletch told me, because Emily Moore, there was a spot where I got physical with Luke Blaze, and I super kicked Luke Blaze and beat up Evan and Onyx in a big showdown before Allegiance. And Emily Moore banned me from ringside. Fletch was like, Chris, I got your back. And, best friend of 20 years, veteran in the game. I took that as, I'm going to be back next week, next show. Ultimately, Jackson Law would interfere, and that would not come to pass. Jackson Law would cause Chris Jones to leave. And if you watch that last promo, a lot of little Easter eggs pop up in that last promo, but you got to watch closely. Like, you see Psycho Circus Clown's mask go in this box. You see LOL's mask go in this box. But the last thing to go in this box on top of all that stuff is a shirt in plain view that says EBW. So we planted the Easter eggs way back then. That was before the conversation about bringing EBW back to help out views. And a lot of people don't pay attention to little things in wrestling, but that's something you kind of got to watch out for.
But, let's talk about the views, because, I don't know how I should phrase this. I've gotten to know Mr. Fletcher, and Mr. Fletcher is a very competitive man from what I've learned in the several months I've gotten to know him. And I understand I'm a businessman myself. I have an internet radio station. I monitor it. We play Mr. Fletcher's podcast on here amongst other shows. Mr. Parsley, obviously, is a part of the roster with his show as well. Mr. Crafton, I get it. But, I mean, is it only about the views? Is it all about the views? I mean, if that's the case, then maybe it goes back to my point from the beginning. XCW, maybe it's just not cutting it anymore. And we see these other companies that, they're doing copycat stuff, and these other companies that have the flashy graphics and the guy with the mask who's the champion 500 days. There's the guys who will call themselves the Foundation. They've got the followers. There's other companies that have been on here. Maybe we should just rename this company to EBW if you say it's just about the views. I mean, and it seems like right now the last few XCW shows, I mean, who is really left on this roster after what you guys did to ACT and even Miano Diaz on the last Rundown show, what he did? I mean, who really is left on this roster that can go toe-to-toe with you guys? So maybe it does go to my point. If it's about the views, should we just now already get ready to name XCW to go to EBW?
I would say it's not primarily just about the views, but that was a reason to think outside the box.
Views are up right now, though. Listen, the last few weeks, the last few shows, the views are up. And engagements are up. Subscribers are up. I mean, you can't hide the facts.
I would like to think it was just kind of like everything after a while, has like a small, stale, rough patch. Like, Fletch wanted to bring some excitement back into EBW. I think a big thing was he wanted to try to bring Chris Jones back into XCW for whatever amount of time he could get me. But like I said, I wasn't ever confirmed to be back. So ultimately, I was going out of town one day, and I asked Fletch to ride with me just in case something were to happen, because I didn't have a trusty vehicle at the time. I was going to get a brand new truck.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, let's talk about this EBW thing. So I mean, we'll say it as it is. I laid out a list of demands, and Fletch agreed to meet them all. I don't want to say how many matches I'm back for, but I agreed for a set amount of matches with a set amount of people. I will say, we'll get to the Jackson Law thing I mentioned earlier. I will say, and Jackson Law is going to freak out when he hears this, but I will say one of the opponents I wanted to come back for was Jackson Law.
What?
But
did I just hear that correct?
Yes, but Fletch is like, hey, there's a list of other people you might have forgotten about. So I'm like, we'll drop Jackson Law from Chris Jones's list of potential opponents, and we put different people on the list instead. But Jackson Law was originally slated to be one of the people I wrestled when I came
But
back.
this
That's
sounds
not the
really
case.
groundbreaking that you have a schedule that is ahead of pretty much everywhere in this sport and even in the underground scene, because you have a limited schedule with days off, with obviously benefits. You've got the schedule that, I mean, people in this sport would die for, but obviously because you are the greatest of all time, in order for Batman to put that cape back on, in order for Superman to come back out, I mean, it's got to be something that works for you. And clearly it does. And since you've come back and obviously put back on that cape on this limited schedule, we've got a roster here in EBW, like I said, with yourself, Mr. Blaze, leading things. I don't know who could really stop you. And obviously, Jay Ellis thought he could be XCW. That didn't work out for him. I mean, Corey Lee is saying that, well, he's not EBW, he's not XCW, so he needs to go find himself. And then you've got your old pal, Mr. Parsley's, who Mr. Parsley himself's got a tag championship, but we really don't know where he stands. He's got Unholy. Then you've even got guys that want to be involved, and you're trying to get them to pass a litmus test. I mean, what is next for you guys?
I will say, it's not just
a lot to unpack.
It's not just the schedule. Obviously, me and Fletch have been friends for over 20 plus years, and I want to see my best friend succeed in anything that he does. You wouldn't be a best friend if you didn't want to see people succeed. And how do I phrase this without revealing anything?
Yeah, don't reveal anything. Like I said, especially here.
We have veterans that are more so focused on like, how much time do I got left? This is what I want to do.
Right.
That's not one of the reasons I came back. One of the reasons I came back was to help specific superstars, give them that rub, do the correct veteran role. Because Xavier Woods of WB said it once. He was asked what is the best era of WWE's roster, and Xavier Woods says it needs to be the present roster, because if the people in the past did their job correctly, that would be the answer to the question. So I decided to come back. A big reason was to help certain people, give them that experience, give them that rub. And you look back to my first match, I'm cutting that promo in the ring. I'm super hated. EBW came back. I super kicked ACT's teeth down to start at SummerMania. And I'm laying it all out there. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to wrestle a person that's been singles champion, a tag team champion. And if you know XCW history, that could have been Brady Branson or Hayden Vex. Both have held singles gold, tag team gold. And I did that on purpose to make people think I was going to wrestle them, and then pulled the swerve. I'm going to wrestle the best XCW superstar, Miano Diaz, the smallest XCW superstar, the superstar with the least amount of experience. And ultimately it was is he ready for the main event scene? Is he ready to be the EBW champion? And you mentioned you were shocked about Miano Diaz joining.
I was shocked.
There's people shocked that he got the world title. Like, apparently Luke Blaze didn't know. Like, I thought everybody in that particular segment that we knew we were going to beat down Patrick O'Reilly and all that stuff, I thought everybody knew I was giving Miano Diaz the world title. Apparently Luke Blaze did. You know that. Chris Jones said,
all right.
Go ahead.
Well, that tells you how well done it was. I'll get to comments in a second, but I mean, you guys have some roster and championship roster. Again, Miano Diaz is the EBW champion, and again, he's been on a whole nother level.
Way better than last time.
Yep, James Cerebral has picked up the hardcore championship again. We should have known all along he was going to be an EBW. And let's talk about our XCW champion of the world, Brady Branson himself. Took that title from Corey Lee, who's still trying to find it. I know he's got the New Age title, but he certainly will, I'm sure, one day down the road maybe figure out if he's found his smile or found out whose side he's on. But you've got three really impressive champions right now, and I want to talk about them, especially our XCW champion of the world, Brady Branson.
Brady is somebody who has he's going to hate that I'm going to mention this, but I mentioned every time I talk about how he's improved over the years. I've not had any one-on-one interaction with Brady. Really? The only interaction that I remember as Chris Jones specifically, there might have been something as Dark Carnival when I was portraying Psycho Circus Clown, but I remember Extreme King. It was can't remember what year, but something had happened to where it ended up being Brady Branson was the only good guy in the ring. and everybody else was bad guy. You think the royalty at the time, Chris Jones, probably Brendan Stickle, and all the other people, we were all heels. So heels are obviously going to try to get the good guy out. So Brady, kind of green, new guy in a panic, started working too fast, kind of messed some things up. But ultimately, we were able to recover and finish the match. You go from there to being like one of the mainstays of XCW. Like Brady Branson's one of like the lead trainers. He's on the writing team with Fletch. At some point, people will be going to Brady Branson for advice. And just like I passed the torch to be Brogan, I think Brady is like, he's working himself in a way to be like the Fletch or the Hazard role that they played for many years. And Brady has shown drastic improvement from Extreme King Panic to XCW EBW version Brady Branson. And then you look at like James Cerebral. He has never been irrelevant in any of his time in XCW.
And he was the man, and let's be honest for a second, he was the man that was keeping this candle alive more than anybody else this year. I mean, he probably in his house probably months ago was basically saying EBW. Listen, you got to say, if there is anybody that has waved the EBW flag better than anybody, I couldn't find a better person than James Cerebral.
And we played that into a feud back at one of the Summer Manias. Like Chris Jones and James Cerebral had never had a singles match, and ultimately Chris Jones, James Cerebral, I Quit match with Gabe as the special guest referee, who really was EBW Elite. And like I said, he's never been irrelevant. He could leave and come back, and he would always be relevant in some form or fashion. That's why James Cerebral, if there's a Chris Jones faction, he's top choice to be my first pick. You go to like Hayden Vex. He's arguably one of the biggest XCW superstars of all time. Second fastest rising superstar right behind me. He's the natural born killer, Hayden Vex.
Yeah, he's just got such a look. He is just such an intimidating figure. I mean, he is central to any group or any company's success. I couldn't agree with you more.
So you look at like Hayden Vex, Brady Branson, James Cerebral, Miano Diaz as kind of the newer guy to get the big rub from the big story. And like the most shocking thing I think of all, besides, obviously Chris Jones returning at SummerMania to super kick ACT's teeth down his throat. Luke Blaze. Like nobody in a million years would think that EBW comes back, Chris Jones, yeah, we can see that. But nobody would expect Chris Jones and Luke Blaze to kind of be partners in this whole story.
But he adds something that I think is a new almost feather or wrinkle to the group. And he's a really, really important figure that we've seen on TV, and I'm sure that'll continue to develop. And again, XCW returns with an all-new show next Thursday. So next Thursday, 6 o'clock Eastern, because all big XCW shows, Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern time, and the next day you're going to get a rundown show where you'll get basically all that stuff broken down in a match or so. So we're going to see all of that. And again, he plays, I really think, an important cog into everything where you guys are going to go, I'm sure.
Definitely. You got to have the financial backer or the evil genius that helps us find that loophole, just like Gabe did originally. Gabe came back, retro XCW show. Gabe came back general manager role and was able to buy stock in EBW. Well, Luke Blaze came back. We were able to find the loophole with the copyright of EBW due to Venom's not quite so good.
He made Venom, you would think that a leader, right, who would have been able to kind of figure out, you could see that Jay Ellis was very visibly upset with him, and you agreed with him on that. And that does go into a point here. I mean, it's either you're with you guys or against you, and there's no in-between in the locker room right now. And you've got these guys like a Corey Lee, who I know you got history with. Then you got Rob Slater and Justin Parsley as examples, who are two other champions. And, I mean, basically everybody is either going to have to make a decision. Either they're with you guys or against you.
And I will say this is it might seem like EBW's done recruiting, but we're always looking for that next person. I'll say this: what would XCW do if Corey Lee joined EBW?
But he
Arguably,
has said, though, he's not EBW or XCW. What do you think that means?
I believe that means that he's undecided. A lot of people have said a lot of things over the years in wrestling. I've said, like you look when I was at ringside. If you watched XCW Save Yourself, like
Yep.
I'm just out here down the middle, and I'm grabbing a foot or I'm helping my guys do what they need to do. Is like a lot of people have said many things. You look at like Rob Slater's never beat Chris Jones in XCW.
True.
Maybe you can't beat him. Join him. Why not get the XCW Tag Team Champions?
What? You did mention that you and Parsley have been close friends for over 20 years. Slater and Parsley are back together. Parsley is obviously not loyal to XCW. I mean, I'm just saying. I mean, I could ask
Justin
him
Parsley is loyal to Justin Parsley.
I'm aware. I've had the guy on, and the guy messages me all the time. I speak to the guy. He's a part of Sportzwire Radio. So I get it. Trust me. I get it. But I got a couple comments here, which I didn't get a chance to run into before I come back to you and come back to the rest of the show. Fletch, former EBW World and Hardcore Champion. I got a point on that in a second. Stay tuned. You said yourself we could have a 5-star banger, but you knocked me off your list. In Mr. Law himself.
I did.
You want to elaborate any further or not really?
I felt there were better stories that could come from, like I said, limited schedule. Obviously, there's limited people. Storylines obviously play a role in who I can and couldn't wrestle. Like, I'm going to get to wrestle everybody I wanted to wrestle. That's a no-brainer. Just like the length of time it's going to take to be able to get to all those superstars.
Sure.
But yes, I did cut Jackson Law off the list to add 2 other people to that list. So instead of getting a Chris Jones or Jackson Law match, you get 2 more Chris Joneses match. So I figured,
hey, you know what? 2 for the price of 1.
I figure it's a better thing for XCW. As much as I would have enjoyed wrestling Dale Jackson Law or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a bigger thing for XCW, and at the end of everything, when it's all said and done, and Chris Jones rides off into the sunset, I'd love to come back on and explain it. But
I'd love to have you. I mean,
when you see the final last hurrah of Chris Jones, you're gonna be like, he made the right decision.
No, and listen, we don't plan to have you on just tonight and then never have you on again. This is obviously not the plan. So, I mean, that we are covering XCW on Sportswire. So we are happy to have coverage of XCW, or it could be EBW. Listen, in a couple of weeks, we may be renaming the company to EBW if you want that. But, I have to come back to Mr. Fletcher because he is going to address everything that has happened with EBW running roughshod over his company next week. In this chair, I'm sure I'll be talking about it with somebody on Sportswire. And we know the last time we saw Mr. Fletcher on XCW TV, he was left underneath some chairs and in blood. Now, I have to ask because he has a rather interesting history with EBW, but we really don't know even where Mr. Fletch stands. I mean, what's your opinions on that? Do you think that Mr. Fletch is EBW or XCW? Should I even ask this? Am I stepping on a landmine here? I mean, what's your opinion?
I will say this. If you watch the first promo, I said Chris Jones is back for 2 reasons. One is the EBW reason. That's to run XCW into the ground.
I got that.
The second reason is there was 4 targets for Chris Jones, which might reveal some things. Take that comment as you will. But one of those targets was Miano Diaz.
Got him.
Take that as you will. He's in EBW, but does that mean other targets would be in EBW? I will say this. Chris Jones did not attack Fletch. That's all I'll say on that.
Well, you know what? I am glad that I was clever enough to ask that question, but Mr. Fletcher is going to address all of this next week. For now on XCW TV, you can especially watch next week's show on YouTube at XCW Shelbyville, where over 1,250 subscribers have subscribed and watched all great XCW content. You can also follow on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and much, much more. We've got another 20 or 25 minutes here with the legendary Hall of Famer Chris Jones. I could ask him so many questions, but we're going to try to be as respectful of his time. But, following up back on the current, though, you said it basically what I have been kind of alluding to, my promo to announce you want to run XCW into the ground. So wouldn't you not want XCW to be renamed EBW? Wouldn't this be the dream finally? I mean, so many people have wanted XCW to be run out of the ground. So many people would love to see it. I mean, what say you?
I say at the end of it all, you'll be seeing EBW presents Backyard Bash instead of Summer Mania as the biggest show of the year. I say you'll be seeing EBW presents Greed. I'm saying EBW presents Halloween Harvest. When it's all said and done, Emily Moore will no longer be XCW owner or operator. And when it's all said and done, there's no way in hell Venom will be general manager. When it's all said and done, I will kick Blackheart and JJ off the announce table after I make Blackheart and JJ announce an EBW
Are you taking applications for the announce team?
Oh, EBW is always accepting new members. XCW roster, like Thomas Bryce has said before, you're with us or you're against us.
I would say, sir, that speaking of coins, I'm sure I could actually provide the funding for EBW TV. So obviously, if that does come, I'm going to say, obviously, for now, let's stay tuned, see what happens. Obviously, go to all your socials. I want to put up Mr. Jones's socials here before I come into the end of the show here. I want to make sure people follow him and join the conversation. But I'll come back to some of it. But on a lighter note, I wanted to ask you this question throughout a lot of your career, and I wanted to know, because we were speaking about this off the air, you were kind of chuckling, you kind of thought about it. Nobody really asked you this. Why did you always wear an Allen Iverson jersey so many times when you wrestled? I have to ask that for the audience.
Oh, well, for the longest time, like, we didn't have gear. Like, we might go get like a t-shirt made. Like, for many years, Fletch wore shorts and a t-shirt that just said Fletch.
Yeah, I did notice that. I did see that.
To stand out in XCW, I was always like, you might not have known my name early in the years, but hey, that one guy that wears those basketball jerseys, who's that guy? And like, I've had other jerseys. I've had Vince Carter. I've had Shaquille O'Neal. I've had Jermaine O'Neal. I've had all these jerseys I've eventually given to Fletch's wife, given out all these jerseys over here. And I ultimately ended up with one jersey left I never give away, Allen Iverson, which is one of my top 5 or 6 favorite players of all time. Michael Jordan's my number one. Ironically, little fact, I've never owned a Michael Jordan jersey for some
and ironically
reason.
In Shelbyville, the Pacers and Bulls
I hate the Pacers.
Okay, there you go. Well, that's
what I hate them. Hate's a strong word. I don't like the Pacers. I don't like the Colts. I don't like IU. I don't like Purdue. I don't think I like any Indiana teams, like Philadelphia Eagles, Chicago Bulls, Florida Gators. Like,
well, my buddy growing up was a huge Eagles fan, so I mean, I could kind of see the Eagles thing, yeah.
And like, you think of like how Chris Jones has acted in XCW over the years. Like, my favorite NFL player of all time is Terrell Owens. Like, I'm the type of guy that's going to run out to the Dallas Cowboys star on the 50-yard line and taunt, just like T.O. did when he was a 49er. Ultimately, he got hit hard by that football player. But like, that's the type of guy for a long time that like Chris Jones was. Is like, T.O., Michael Jordan. I just don't like Indiana specifically really a lot. There's not a lot of stuff to do here. They don't like support a lot of things. Like, we've had like one WrestleMania. Maybe it was WrestleMania. I can't remember. It was like WrestleMania 3 or something. I don't even know.
Oh, was it WrestleMania 8? I think it was at the Hoosier Dome, right?
Something like that, yeah. But like, we don't get like Super Bowls or any of the big shows really. So like, Indiana's not like a premier place to live, even though it's like in like the top however many states of places people enjoy or whatever. But,
it's funny though that you say that, because I'm in New York and I always feel like people say like New York is the worst place in New York, and it's funny. And you say that about Indiana, and I can't really make a comment, good or bad, because I haven't been to Indiana, so I can't say whether I like it or not like it. So I'm going to respectfully decline, because I am going to have coverage of people from the state of Indiana. So You might be able to say those things because you are Chris Jones. You're a living legend. You're the greatest backyard wrestler of all time. But I have to ask you, sir, coming up near the end of the show for now, what are your goals here, A, for yourself for the rest of 2023, but also in addition to that with EBW?
Obviously, you think about story. You think the primary goal, obviously, is for EBW to be successful, to finally rid ourselves of XCW, to reign supreme as the ultimate backyard wrestling company of all time. Obviously, the primary goal for EBW. And for those people that are part of EBW, like Damiano Diaz, like I've mentioned before, like first main event, first world title, he's like one of the faces of the EBW faction. He's not just like the new guy in the stable. Like, he's the guy. He's
becoming your Dom Mysterio almost.
Yeah.
He's going to become your Dom Mysterio.
Hayden Vex doesn't really need much. I mean, you just look at Hayden Vex, he's Hayden Vex.
Yeah.
And like Brady, ever since Brady dropped the All-American gimmick and became, breakaway Brady Branson,
he's so
really
big.
He's really developed himself as like his own superstar. And like, who knows, like next season, maybe there's an EBW show before the end of the story. Who knows?
You know what? It wouldn't shock me. You even got guys that are trying to join the group. Justin Jacobs and Mitchell Maverick.
Speaking of Jacobs and Mitchell Maverick, you talk about them. It's kind of funny. You think about it, they keep trying. We make them go do something. So it adds a little bit of humor to like the super seriousness of what the show is. Like, you look at like the XCW Elite right now. You look at like Corey Lee. He's not picking a side.
No. Jay Ellis, you have Jay Ellis, who's not
like you even think like Jay Ellis and like
ACT.
Jay Ellis, JJ Kelty, Jesse Justice, Jackson Law. Like, none of them have really, besides Jay Ellis, have put their foot in the ground. Like, and like, who's going to stand up to EBW? You got ACT, which
you guys
says he's going to treat. He wanted to bring some personal stuff into it. Talk about. I took a trip in this year in March, and he gave me a ride to the airport. Talked about the random plane crash videos that popped up on my TikTok or whatever. He says he's going to show me what a plane crash is. Well, if you watch XCW Save Yourself, who was really the plane crash victim in that instance?
I think that was actually what he went through. From what you guys did to him, might be worse than a plane crash. I might have rather have been in a plane crash.
And you think about other people that could step up. You think about Hunter Halkin. Let me tell you right now, look into my eyes as I stare in this camera, Hunter. EBW, just like Cerebral told Patrick, EBW is not the smoke that you want to have. So you stay there and you keep doing your open challenges and you just stay out of our way.
I think that's some woo.
And then you go back. Yeah, you go back to other people like Eric Mason.
Oh, yeah.
Eric Mason doesn't want the smoke either. Eric Mason's like the second coming of Tyler Skaggs. And we've seen what happened when Chris Jones feuded Tyler Skaggs. I walked out on top in the Tyler Skaggs thing. I ultimately got the final laugh. They don't have like that veteran to help them. Blackheart retired, went to the table.
Yep.
All their veterans, like you got Brogan. And
Brogan's been on a few of the streams, actually. It's funny you said that. Brogan introduced himself last week on Sportswire. He said hello.
And, I have respect for Brogan because of what I put him through in that death match. And like I told you, outside the storylines and stuff, I passed the torch to Brogan. He is the new me, but I won't hesitate to put Brogan in the ground if he gets in my way too many times. But obviously, EBW wants to reign supreme. We want all the gold. Like I said, there's still tag titles we don't have. There's still a New Age championship we don't have. There's still an international championship we don't have. So, like, we're always paying attention. We're always looking for the next person to join the family. But as for Chris Jones specifically,
yes,
like I said, I come back to do the job that some of the veterans might not seem as inclined to do. I want to put over some of the newer people and the people that I want to give the newer people the rub. Like, it's not really revealing anything, but there's going to come something to pay. Obviously, I super kicked ACT. So At some point, Chris Jones and ACT is going to have some type of interaction.
And I've had ACT on the show, and ACT is a guy that's ironically would have probably been on your side of the coin of things, let's say a year ago, is now on the other end of it, which is so fascinating. He came on here on Sportswire Radio, and he's been, I guess, in a way, kind of seen things differently, and he certainly gets into the way of things of what you guys want to do.
He got it. ACT is getting himself tangled in a web he might not want to be involved in for too long. But
he may not be hosting rundown shows even much longer.
Maybe Luke Blaze is hosting rundown after EBW wins.
I'll have to find out October 6th, maybe.
But obviously there's going to be some type of interaction between myself and ACT because of the outcome of SummerMania. You look at what ACT's done this year. He's won Extreme King. At the beginning of the year, I think he was hardcore champion. But like ACT is slowly kind of catapulting himself, but always falling up short. Like he never got that one-on-one with Corey Lee until Save Yourself. He wins Extreme King. Can't grasp the brass ring.
Win the brass ring, exactly.
Can't get that XCW gold yet. And so at some point, there's going to be hell to pay for myself or ACT. That might be target number 2. And like I said, there's 4 total targets at least. And there's a couple other newer people. Obviously not going to reveal too much. A couple other newer people I want to wrestle and give the rub to. I'm back to do a veteran's job that I felt like I'm not saying that they don't, but our veterans could have done a better job of doing. And like you see me on Diaz, look at him now.
Well, you know what? I'm going to leave that comment there, but I am going to want people to follow you on some social media platforms to join the conversation. I'm sure we'll see how this thing's all develop, and it'll be next Thursday will be the next XCW show. We'll have rundown right afterwards and more coverage on Sportswire. We'll stay tuned for details on that. But I did want to ask you a general question, and I do have to ask it to you. And what does it mean to you, though, to be considered the greatest backyard wrestler of all time?
If my mom is watching this, she's like, oh, Chris Jones, he's just cocky and all that stuff, but it doesn't have anything to do with it. To have your peers, even people such as like Blackheart or newer people, like to come on No Falls Finish. One of the questions I always ask is who's the worst and who's the best, and to have so many peers of people I've not even shared the ring with to talk about Chris Jones being the greatest of all time, to people coming up, asking me for the advice that they asked me for, like, talk about the Brogan match for a second, the death match or whatever. Brogan's like, what do you want to do? You want to do this, this, and this? I'm like, calm down. Let's just focus on putting on the best possible match. And we didn't really plan a lot. Like, obviously the ending was planned with the Weed Eater that we did and stuff like that. We wanted to pay tribute to The Rock and Stone Cold as we did the WrestleMania 19 spot. Because a lot of people, wrestling buffs, know it was the first time at WrestleMania The Rock finally went over.
Yep.
And the Rock put on Stone Cold's vest, did the stunner, and also Stone Cold gave him a rock bottom while me and Brogan did each other's finishers. I paid it forward to Brogan. Like, that's the type of stuff that I really enjoy doing. And like, I'm not, like I said before, I'm not back to win championships. I'm not back to step on toes. I'm back to help the current landscape and the generation we got get to that next level and get that veteran rub, because I'm not back for a long time. I'm back for some time, but not a long time. So I have a job to do, and that job is to make sure the current landscape is good for the future. And people, talking about Chris Jones being the best. We've had so many people that are excellent superstars, and like I said, Chris Jones has had bad matches, but I've more so had great matches. And like, you can't have the good without the bad. You just need the bad to motivate you. Like I talked about the SummerMania 2 with Cynical, my worst match of all time, that motivated me to improve myself. Me and Jason Arcane had a bad match, which was expected to be just a banger of a match. And it was a kendo stick. It was like a ladder match for a kendo stick. And Hazard and Brandon Hobbs had a death match and broke the ladder. And so ultimately it kind of messed up some of the stuff. And me and Jason Arcane had not a good match. That motivated me to continue. And like, everybody should take the bad, mold it into a ball, and think about it, and help them with that mindset of how can I improve myself? How can I make myself better? How can I make my dance partner better? Because it's not just about yourself when you're in the ring. It's about protecting your dance partner. It's about telling that story. And if you're the veteran, it's about getting that guy to the next spot. Or if you're a bad guy, the good guy's winning. It's like, well, I've been beating up this good guy for like so long. Like, I need to make this face, like make him be that face.
He's making believable.
And a lot of times, people we have be faces, they don't do a good job at, getting crowd reactions. That's part of the other dance partner's ability is, I need to make them hate me, so they cheer this guy. So being able to do this since 1996, over 20 plus years, myself, Fletch, Hazard, and I think Justin Parsley have been involved in some sort with backyard wrestling in 4 different decades. That's a lot.
No, that's like you think about that. That's almost like when we think about in sports, when you get into that rarefied air of guys. I always thought in Major League Baseball, there was players that played 4 decades, and there was only a handful of guys. I remember as a kid, Ricky Henderson did it. I think Jamie Moyer did it. There's very few people that you could say in any sport. In basketball, 4 decades. Yours, Tim Duncan had played for 20 plus years in the NBA. Was still a relevant, very good player.
Yeah.
Udonis Haslem just retired with the Heat. He was playing for almost 20 years. I mean, LeBron obviously is another example. Kobe when he was alive, God rest his soul. But the point is, when you think about that 20 plus years, you've done that. But before I get to closing thoughts here, I did have to ask you, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, what did Kurt Acid mean to you?
I mean, Kurt Acid meant a lot, more so to certain people. Like, there's so many memorable moments that I've had to be able to share the ring with Kurt Acid. I almost forgot. You mentioned something about Fletch injecting poison.
Yes.
Into XCW. Well, the point of that is after EBW ended the first time, Fletch and Genocide were going to be feuding, and Fletch wanted to inject poison into EBW. The only way EBW Superstars had an XCW contract was if they were a champion at the time. So Cerebral automatically in because he dressed up as Grim Reaper, won a belt. But like Chris Jones had nowhere to go after the first EBW Empire fell. So Fletch brought Chris Jones back, injected that poison. It would lead to one of the best feuds with Genocide. And like Genocide allowed me so much leeway in one of the feuds that we had. Like I said some heinous stuff, and like Chris Jones as a heel, it's so much easier being a bad guy because you can pretty much say whatever you want within reason. And like Genocide's dad, Kurt Acid's dad, would work at Cobb's for many years, and one of the best promos of all time, in Fletch's opinions, this promo I cut outside Cobb's where I just run down Genocide's dad that had passed away. I cut a promo in a cemetery where I was talking to Genocide's dead dad. And like, ultimately, I made this, luckily, a couple had come up and we're in the cemetery. It was ultimately leading to where I was going to urinate on Genocide's dad's grave. Ultimately, we didn't do that because this old couple had come up.
That was like the Big Boss Man segment years ago with the Big Show. He went to the Big Show's father's grave site. Yeah, I get it.
Genocide is one of the people that helped. And like, you might, people talk about Chris Jones being the greatest of all time. But if I didn't have a dance partner like Genocide to have some of the best matches I've ever had with, I don't think Chris Jones gets that level. I love technical wrestling. I love, chain wrestling, all that stuff. And the only person I really got to do that with is Genocide. And then now I get to I've played the Genocide role in some aspects where people's like, hey, I don't get to chain wrestle with like Tommy. Can we do some chain wrestling? Sure. And you look at like what I did with Miana Diaz, a little bit of chain wrestling, the headlock, and, playing the old school style heel and stuff like that. Like I get to do that Genocide stuff with other people. And like, I got to team up with Genocide as LOL, fought Genocide for many years. And like I mentioned earlier, Genocide's one of the people, Kurt Acid, is one of the people that, he came and got me for XCW. Like, Kurt Acid was in my 6th grade class, so who's to say if Fletch asked Kurt Acid to go get Chris Jones and Kurt Acid says, no, I don't feel like it. Like, what does the Chris Jones landscape look like to this day?
It's another one of those like what ifs. There's another.
It was definitely a big loss to the backyard wrestling world, and like I mentioned, it affected me a lot because 3 hours before Genocide died. Well, actually, Genocide was originally like he was going to pass away. They were going to pull like the tubes and stuff like earlier, like days before that. They took all the tubes out and Genocide got better. So like we were like, okay, maybe Genocide's on a potential road to recovery. So we got like his funeral and stuff was all scheduled and stuff when they decided to pull the cord and he got better.
Oh, wow.
And then he died 3 hours after my cousin, who ironically is the one that coaxed me into going to try to wrestle with HCW with Hazard and Parsley. So Kurt Acid has played a role in my life that I don't think, obviously me and Fletch, 20 plus years, he's my brother, we're family, Cynical, 20 plus years, my brother, my family. Like Kurt Acid has played a role in my life that I don't think anybody else is going to be able to fill that void. And even though he's been gone over a year, it still affects all of us to this day. We retired some of Genocide's moves. Occasionally, maybe Fletch will bring out like the 187 or something, but Genocide meant something to the wrestling world that I don't think we're going to see again or realize again. And I hope the wrestling world realizes it before like another person passes away, like myself or like a Fletch or like even a Hazard or something.
Well, let's hope you guys aren't past. You guys are still young people.
We're in good health right now. Body beating up wise, not quite so much, but
reminds me of that Denzel emoji where he goes, "Oh," and everyone uses on Twitter. Please don't say that. I mean, listen, but you know,
but Kurt Acid had a role. Like I said, I don't think. I know a lot of people realize it, but I don't think some people realize how important he was until something like that happens. Unfortunately, again.
It's unfortunate, but I think the best thing that we can do is continue to honor his memory and talk about him. I know Justin was very emotional in speaking about him when Justin was here on the show, and certainly Fletch had
It's definitely not easy.
No, and you know what? But if I didn't before I left, I know I'll bring you back, but I don't know when I'm going to bring you back because obviously there's so many people on the show that we're going to talk from the company, EBW, XCW, whatever you want to call it this. But the point is, in all seriousness, is that I had to ask that question because if I didn't, I would have walked away tonight and said, you know what? I don't think there's anything else I would have asked you tonight. But I had to ask you on that because I felt like because of everything in the company's history, everything, you know, Justin, obviously, Fletch being on you, those two, the three of you guys, I mean, I know ACT's been on, I know Law, even Trinity, but the history is not, when I think of your companies, the three of you guys are intertwined so much with him that I had to ask you that question. I could ask you millions of questions. But I want to turn it over to you now in closing thoughts. I want to give you the floor now. I want to give you anything that you'd like to say to the audience that's watching this, that's a fan, that's not. I mean, anything that you'd like to plug, anything that I missed. So as I always turn it over to people here on Sportswire, I give you the opportunity in your closing thoughts. Anything else you want to plug, share, or say, the floor is yours.
Well, first off, obviously, thanks for bringing me on the show. I love to talk wrestling, video games, anything sports.
We're going to do that next time, video games and sports.
But to the XCW world, obviously, it's been a pleasure to share the ring with some amazing people. Cynical, Fletch, Corey Lee, Tommy Merriman, Brogan O'Shea, obviously. There's just so many people. Stephen Raines, DTC.
Maybe that's Kurt Acid saying you have to mention something.
Maybe. Ironically, let me grab it real quick. You think about Chris Jones's wrestling gear. It's a little Illuminati triangle. So, but
boy, you know, and Illuminati is kind of in a way tied to these things. Boy, you know, there are certain things happen for a reason. I'm always a believer in karma on certain things. So there you go. The floor is yours. Continue, sir.
Obviously, sharing the ring with Kurt Acid, Matt Chin Show. Like I've shared the ring with all my different characters. Anybody I've ever shared the ring with, I just hope a little bit of my veteran mentality, the way I was able to lead, the way I was able to teach, especially Brogan. Brogan learned a lot in that death match about doing stuff for the camera angles, like anything I was able to teach, inspire anybody to do. Just know, I know people might not get praise in the way that they think. But this is me praising you now. Everybody has room for improvement. Me, Fletch, Tommy, Corey Lee, ACT, Brady. Everybody has some way they can improve. Take all the bad you get with the good and use it to fuel, because we have some of the best people we've had in a long time. We're running some of the best XCW wrestling that we've had in a long time. So, like, you think about EBW coming in, views being up. Make sure you don't miss any of this story, because, like, EBW is not the only story going on in XCW. Obviously, you had Fletch being attacked. You got the tag team wrestling with Unholy, Venom missing the loophole. You got some comedy stuff going on. Like, we're doing some of the best storytelling. Like, ACT's story for the season's not over. ACT.
Oh, I know that. I mean,
ACT's story is one of the, when I found out what ACT's story was for this season, I was completely behind it. I told Fletch, let's do that.
Well, I said when he was on the air here, I said it was almost like he had boy, there Jesus. We go. The stars are aligning. But what I said real quick on ACT, it was almost as if, like, the YouTube dream, he was trying to chase the YouTube dream. Like Shawn Michaels had the boyhood dream to be the WWF champion at the time. It's like ACT's YouTube dream was to be the XCW champion because he was a fan of XCW. I found that out in watching. So, I mean, ACT's got a story that is far from over, and that's why people need to go and support XCW. You're absolutely right.
And if you ever feel like something's getting stale, like, there's always ways to, like, bring something new, reinvent yourself. Hell, I've done it multiple times. C-Unit, Brother Jones, the franchise player, almost the revelation Chris Jones, but, that story never came to pass. I was supposed to team up with Austin Chaos. But so many things have happened through all the years. So I just want to hope that I have left a little bit of legacy with even the veterans. Like I said, I was their veteran, and I'm a veteran to, like, another generation. I just want to hope that myself, Fletch, people like that, when we interact with the newer people, like the Hunters, the ACTs, the Brogans, Miano Diaz, I just hope that our legacy has left some type of impact on their life. And I will leave you with this.
Okay.
We talked about, back for a limited time. At some point, Chris Jones is going to ride off into the sunset. But before Chris Jones rides off into the sunset, we'll leave you with this little nugget, little egg, because Fletch allows me to speak freely a lot of the times. So Chris Jones is leaving Sportswire Radio Galaxy, XCW Galaxy, EBW people, everybody watching all around the world, Backyard Wrestling, is like, before Chris Jones rides off into that sunset for good, I'll return to the beginning. That's all I'm going to say.
You, ladies and gentlemen, you want to talk about cliffhangers. Did Chris Jones leave maybe arguably the greatest cliffhanger we have heard on Sportswire radio history? Return to the beginning. That is why you need to follow, first of all, XCW on all their social media channels, including Facebook at XCW Shelbyville, YouTube at XCW Shelbyville, where you can watch next week's show and see more of Chris Jones and EBW. Twitter at XCW Wrestling 1. Also Instagram, XCW_Shelbyville. And if you want to follow C-Unit himself, the franchise player, the Joker, everything else he's done in between, his most important role yet right now as the leader of EBW, he's on Twitter at CUnit123123, Instagram CUnit Chris Jones, and he's also on TikTok as well. So join him on his journey, because I promise you it'll be worth it, and we cannot wait to have this man back on Sportswire Radio, and I am fired up for XCW coverage here in Sportswire. Listen, I might have to get the EBW shot. I mean, I got to be honest.
You're with us or you're against us, Tom Bryce.
Well, you know what? I have to say, you always do have the cool look. You do. You always look good in the pictures. You always look good on TV. I mean, you do have a look. I mean, you are marketable. You did mention marketing earlier, and you are a marketable man. So I cannot deny that the marketing and the street cred certainly says go with Chris Jones. means, or else the stars will not be aligned with you. So certainly those are things, and I'm a smart businessman. I've done okay in life in business, so I can certainly see where the chips are, and the chips are certainly with EBW, and I wouldn't bet against EBW, and I would certainly say if I'm an XCW right now, tread very lightly, because these guys are here to stay despite whatever Chris Jones says, and I can't wait for the future. It has been a tremendous honor to have you. I can't wait to do more in the future. I can't wait to find out what this cliffhanger is. But in the meantime, thank you for this opportunity. You have definitely proven why you were the greatest backyard wrestler of all time. You have proven why you are an XCW Hall of Famer and some. And I can't wait to talk with you again soon. And thank you so much for the opportunity. I can't wait to watch you next week on XCW TV.
Thank you for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was the XCW Hall of Famer himself, the legendary man that has won over 20 plus championships, over 11 world titles. That is Mr. Chris Jones himself. He is the man behind EBW. They are definitely for life, and they are very close, I think, to putting the XCW in the ground. Finally, it looks like it could happen. You'll stay tuned for XCW's TV on YouTube, especially at XCW Shelbyville, to find out more. But my name in the meantime is the Reverend Tom Bryce, your voice of all wrestling, the host of the Sports Report, and the owner of Sportzwire Radio, the #1 global radio station. And if you're on sportnarium.com/player, you're going to go back to your regularly scheduled programming, which is a mix of tunes, Peter Gabriel, Sledgehammer, Information Society, What's on Your Mind, and others. But I'll be back here for a trio of shows. Friday, I'm here 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time with Moses Ireton, James Barris of CCW at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and our NFL Pick Show at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. And Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock, the legendary Anthony McLean, two-time national champion over at Brooklyn College, also JCC champion. So some more details for that. But thank you, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on the #1 global radio station that is Sportswire Radio. And thank you to all of our XCW supporters and, of course, the legendary Chris Jones one more time. Thank you, everybody, and good night.